Hi everybody, good afternoon. It is December 17th. We are almost to Christmas and almost at the end of 2024. Been a challenging year for supply chain for sure. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the risks that have, kind of reared their head in the supply chain world. I want to talk about how they're not going to go away anytime soon, but really what you need to try and do to prepare for these, particularly for the startups, right? I mean, I've seen statistics out there where almost 2/3 of startups have supply chain disruptions in their first year. So what are some of the things that you can do to prevent them? Again, you're never going to stop them because every day, I feel like every month, every year, it's something new. But let's dive into a few, okay? So if you think about just your suppliers that you use, whether you're manufacturing or distributing, you have different suppliers you source from all over the world, all over the country, different states, wherever it may be. How do you know that all of your suppliers are going to be able to give you what you need at a given time? How are you vetting them? So let's think about, for example, let's say you are a company that makes bread, okay, and you need grain. Well, for the past 2.5 years, there's been a war with Russia and Ukraine. What you might not know is Ukraine is a top exporter of grain. So with that unrest happening, now they're not able to export as much or any because of this war. So now what you have to do is, and what all these other companies are trying to do, is looking for other suppliers that they can call on and use that they can supply their grain for their products. Now, what we've started to see this year, or particularly even after COVID, is a lot of companies now are looking to nearshore. And what that means is they're bringing their supplier base, their manufacturing base closer to them here in the United States. So nearshoring could be opening up operations and manufacturing in Mexico, Canada, places where labor is a little bit cheaper, right? So they're cutting down on the transit time because, again, if you think about it, right, you're manufacturing and producing somewhere in China, you're looking at a 2-week transit time on the water, okay? So starting to look at that supplier base, bringing it closer to where your operations are, bringing it closer to where your customers are. This is the evaluation of your geographic risk, okay? And within that, again, going back to all those suppliers, do you want to put all your suppliers in one basket? Do you want to have a diverse supplier mix? And the reason why I bring that up is if you have that one supplier that going back to where, let's say they're out of Ukraine, what happens if they can't export that? Who else can you call on? Do you maybe want to, have a different allocation of supplier mix? Maybe you have 80% from this supplier, 20% from this supplier. So that way, if something happens with this one, you can call on this one. If something happens with this one, now you can allocate 100% over here. But having that diverse supplier base. Also, how often are you vetting their financials? I can tell you when I was on the transportation side, it was not unheard of or uncommon for us for every year to go back to the companies we were hauling freight for and ask for updated financials, yearly financials. Obviously, it's a lot easier with publicly traded companies where you can see that. But with private companies, how are you getting that information? What sort of questions or, processes can you put in place where you feel comfortable knowing what their financial state is in? So again, just thinking about some of those geographic challenges, thinking about some of the risks of certain suppliers are. Now let's take a look at 2 more I want to talk about, okay? In the past several years, I feel weather events have really affected supply chains, particularly in the winter, okay? When we have snowstorms that come in through the Midwest, right? What happens is, let's say you have a snowstorm in Chicago. Well, all those trucks that are trying to come into Chicago right now, it's creating a bottleneck effect where they can't get empty. So all the other locations in the country where they might go back to pick up freight, now there's not as much capacity. So that becomes a challenge for those other shippers in those geographic regions. How are they going to get their product out, okay? And so, maybe other parts of the country they can call on and say, hey, my Chicago warehouse, for example, we just had a blizzard. It's going to take a couple of days for us to dig out. Can you start shipping some product out of I'm going to make up a city, a Memphis, Tennessee warehouse location, a Phoenix, Arizona warehouse location, okay? Having those other geographic regions that you can rely on to get product to your customers, because again, if you don't get it to those customers, what's a lost sale cost you, okay? And then from a logistics perspective, which is where I spent most of my career, I've always had the mindset where I use more than one supplier. Now, I might have one company operate as a control tower, okay, working with my carrier base, but I've had anywhere from 5 to 9 carriers that I use within truckload and LTL to service my customers. And the reason I do that is I've just found that some carriers are better. Now, obviously, you're not going to use a truckload carrier to ship something LTL, but if I have a customer base that's in a certain geographic region, and I know there's an LTL carrier in that region that performs really well, well, then I'm going to try and give a lot of that LTL freight to that carrier because I know they can service that customer base well. If I have a truckload lane that, for example, I have a carrier that their home base is in, I'm going to make up a city, Sacramento, California, and I'm shipping product from Chicago out to Los Angeles or San Francisco, which is actually closer to Sacramento, maybe I'm going to work with that carrier because it's getting them closer back to their home base. Maybe they're willing to give me a better discount. So I'm going to look at those lanes. I'm going to talk to the carriers and see which lanes fit with their network where they're trying to get back to their head base. And again, that's another area that you can diversify your suppliers. You could see a cost reduction potentially depending on if it's consistent volume. But these are all the risks and these are all the things that you need to take a look at and think about within your supply chain, okay? I would also challenge you, if you're a manufacturer, how many manufacturing sites do you have? What happens if a line goes down in one of your facilities? Do you have other locations that they can act as backups to produce that product? What's your game plan? Do you stock extra inventory so that way if the line does go down, you have that available to ship to your customers? Again, just some simple examples of risks in supply chain that you need to take into consideration. I appreciate you guys watching this. If you found this valuable, please don't forget to subscribe and like and look at my other videos where I do go into other strategies within the supply chain. Thank you for watching. Have a great holiday, everybody.